Hello, I'm Ari Lax, and this week I'll be recording with modern black-white Eldrazi. So, to give some background on this, the first time around, uh, Eldrazi Temple and Eye of Ugin were printed. Back then, all of the colorless Eldrazi were really expensive. So there were these big, giant 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 drops with Annihilator. And in order for them to be remotely castable in any not, well, remotely castable in general, there have to be some kind of lands that produce more than one mana each. So Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple were printed to enable that. And at the time, there were smaller Eldrazi, but they were all things like Kozilek's Predator. So they were 4-drop green creatures or whatever. So the Eldrazi Temple and Eye of Ugin both have this clause that says colorless Eldrazi spells, um, which made them, your 4-drop was still a 4-drop, but your 10-drop was now a 9-drop. So that's a little more reasonable, or effectively a 9-drop. This time around, the Devoid mechanic happened. Uh, and suddenly, you have the ability in Modern to play 8 soul lands, or lands that make 2 mana. Now, they do only cast Eldrazi, but I would like to make the point that in Legacy, there is literally just a giant spectrum of decks because Ancient Tomb and City of Traders are so good. And certain cards that have been cast by these include Sea Drake, Hanweir Watchkeep, Spawn Writhe, Preeminent Captain. I mean, it doesn't take a lot for a creature that costs effectively one less to suddenly be awesome. Um, as a result, this is kind of what's turned up. So the other half of this is that in Modern, there's not really a lot of good stacks pieces, mostly because it's really hard to actually put like a Trinisphere into play first before your opponent does stuff, and the mana costs aren't as clustered for Chalice of the Void, and they haven't been since the banning of Treasure Cruise. So there's not like a bunch of artifact stack pieces like there are in Legacy. You're not gonna like Mox Diamond into Ancient Tomb into Trinisphere on turn one or whatever. Um, but there's a lot of good, cheap, interactive, and hate cards that exist in the format, and that's kind of where this deck, or this style of deck that kind of popped up about a month ago, I want to say, give or take, with a mono black version, is really trying to get its leverage. So you're leaning on the same cheap interactive base that makes Jund possible, but your threats are a little just different. So cheap interaction, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Best Ever, Path. So there's a bunch of different splash versions of this. There's a blue-black version that has, uh, sometimes it has Drowner of Hope, sometimes it has Delay, sometimes it has Ulamog's Nullifier. But that deck's removal is not very good. It's a black-red list with Lightning Bolt. But really, Path is great because, as we'll get to it, the Exile Zone is kind of one of the keys of this deck. And having, one drop removal that answers anything and puts stuff in the Exile Zone for you to process, pretty big. Um, 4 isn't enough removal, so I've opted, this is kind of a compilation list from a bunch of things. I have a Go for the Throat and a Slaughter Pact. Some lists have a second Go for the Throat. Um, it's, probably the best removal spell in the format, unless everyone's playing Affinity, in which case you gotta make your choice of whether you want to, Doomblade or whatever. But Slaughter Pact's just generally great to have this effect. It's the kind of thing where if you do it to someone once, suddenly they just like, or if your opponent knows it could be a thing, they just have to play so differently. Um, and then this is, one other big thing about the stack is that you get to play main deck Relic Progenitus. This is a card that just beats certain decks straight up in Modern. And repeatedly, every single deck that's been able to main deck this, it's just kind of been awesome from time to time for them. So like Tron has been, it's like been one of the things that they get a lot of free wins because of this card. Um, Again, I'll cite Black White Tokens as played at Grand Prix San Diego 2012 with this card. I think it was Tim Landale had it, and I think Melissa DeTora may have at that event. And this card was just great in that deck too. So you got this nice, cheap interaction package that lets you actually get to your big threats. Um, Now, looking at the threats, I want to make the big point that none of these are abrupt decayable, and all of them actually provide good value. So your decks, that's the other big thing is you're good against a lot of the spot removal. So the Grixis decks and the Jund decks are not the best positioned against you. So we've got Lingering Souls, just generally a great card, very hard for the Grixis decks to beat. One of the draws to white on top of Path to Exile. We'll get to the other draw later, but Lingering Soul is just a very powerful magic card. Um, Wasteland Strangler is kind of the big enabler of this deck, just being able to, 3 mana, 3/2 that kills a creature is like reasonable rate, but when it effectively costs 2 mana, it's just absurd. Blight Herder, similarly, you can reliably process with it, so you're talking about like a three, sometimes a 3 mana 4/5, because of your Eldrazi Temples or Eye of Ugins or whatever. Sometimes like a 3 or 4 mana 4/5 that makes a bunch of tokens, very good rate, especially because the tokens also make mana. Um, Oblivion Sower is your big threat. You just kind of need a big thing. The ability's fine. There's not a lot to say about this card. It's just the generic big thing you play. Then you have an Ulamog because you can actually get to that point, and this is the best big creature to play. Some lists have two, but I can't. I really struggle to imagine a world where I want to actively draw a bunch of Ulamogs with this deck, to be honest. There is a bunch of mana in the deck, to be fair, but some of it's Expedition Map, which is really just a tutor toolbox card. Some of it's a bunch of Ghost Quarters. Again, you're really just a hate card deck, and Ghost Quarter is a hate card for a certain spectrum of the metagame. 7 Eldrazi Soul lands. You can't play 4 Eye of Ugins. That's kind of crazy. There's a Cavern of Souls in the deck. This is the colorless stack, as you can kind of tell. There was originally like a Vault of the Archangels in the list I looked at, but not the. I think by the time you cast Eldrazi, there's a limited number of situations where life total starts mattering. And even then, it's Stranger Mana a little worse. Cavern, I think, being able to tutor for a Cavern, being able to tutor for a Vault also, you need to like do that in a specific time frame. Though Vault plus Lingering Souls is really nice at holding off the ground. But I think tutoring for the Cavern really adds a dimension to what you're doing against certain decks. Um, Looking at the color mana, you've got a Bog as a way to tutor up, something that exiles stuff. Marsh Flats, Godless Shrine, Plains, Swamp, Urborg that makes your Eye of Ugin stat for mana. Some lists play Shambling Vent. I've played against this deck with Shambling Vent in it. It was very bad. It's very hard to activate in the deck, honestly. And if you're going to get a threat land, I'd rather just get Eye of Ugin. And if I already have an Eye of Ugin, I'm just trying to get to the point where I'm activating it for the Ulamog. Moving to the sideboard, this is the other reason to play white. The white sideboard cards in this format are absurd and always have been. You get to play Stony Silence. Affinity is not a very good matchup. This card is very good against Affinity. Celestial Purge and Disenchant, kind of hit different sides of the spectrum. Both hit Blood Moon, though, is a big thing. Your mana's not the best against Blood Moon. Surgical KOs some decks. Duress is additional discard against the combo decks. Just kind of hits them all. Life gain because your inherent matchup against Burn is not insane. I cut down from some lists had like 5 of this effect. I cut down to 2 timely because I'm not a big fan of that card, but it's still good. And the 2/2 split represents the fact that I care about beating Zoo as well. I have a Miser's Damnation, just like a big clearing effect to take care of stuff. Though, you know what? I'm going to make a live change here. I'm not really huge on the Damnation. The idea of having a Vault of the Archangel in the 75 is good. I actually like, the more I think about it, I think that I'd rather have the Vault main because I think that the Lingering Souls interaction is actually really huge. And I can put the Cavern in the board, tutor up the Cavern against the decks where I need to beat counter magic. So there we go. That looks like a much more cohesive deck. So the sideboard's your typical mix of some really big sweeping effects and a lot of cheap interaction. Kind of makes your deck most efficient as possible. There's no Spellskite. Again, I mentioned a lot of lists have it, but your deck's really good against Abrupt Decay. If they Abrupt Decay your Wasteland Strangler, hopefully this took out a creature on the way in. So, 2 for 1. If they Abrupt Decay Relic or Map, I don't know if you set yourself up for that. So I don't like Spellskite because it's just going to eat the decay that's in their hand or whatever. Game 2 it might be okay. I just don't even like it as a hate card against a lot of decks. I'd rather have Knight of Souls Betrayal or something against Infect or Affinity as well. I'd rather have a bigger effect than just Spellskite. Even though Spellskite's like okay against Twin, okay against Amulet, though not even. I think that you might just die to Amulet if you go down that road. But anyways, this deck, it's interesting. It does something unique, and I kind of want to try it. This card is apparently very powerful, so that's like a good thing. Yeah, it's just unique. And the one thing that I will note, it does have a lot of potential to grow in the future because we are getting another set of Devoid cards. So starting early with this, get an idea of where it's at now, probably a good idea.